This is the story of shadows, of judgment, and of the fierce, unyielding protection found in the most unlikely of places. In the heartland of America, where the lines between good and bad are often drawn in stark, judgmental strokes, there exists a brotherhood known only by their cuts and their thunderous approach, the Vipers MC. Outsiders call them outlaws, criminals, the very definition of bad news. They see the leather, the scars and the bikes, and they judge. They don't see the code, the loyalty, or the deep, silent pact that binds them. Family over everything, even when that family isn't blood. Our story starts not in a smoky bar or on a winding highway, but in a quiet, manicured suburban street that hid a terror far greater than any open road threat. It was a perfect sunny Saturday afternoon, the kind that whispers of barbecues and carefree weekends. But for 6-year-old Lily, it was just another countdown to fear. Lily was a bright little girl with eyes too big and too old for her age. They held secrets, the kind that weigh down a small soul. Her home, a picture-perfect white colonial, was a cage. The monster wasn't under the bed. He was sitting at the head of the dinner table, smiling a public smile that hid a private cruelty. Her mother, Sarah, was trapped, a vibrant woman slowly being extinguished by the slow, psychological, and physical abuse that leaves no visible marks for the outside world to see. "He hurts my mum where no one sees," Lily would whisper to her doll, summarizing a complex trauma with painful simplicity. The local police were useless. Domestic disputes, they'd call it, hands tied by the lack of clear evidence or Sarah's terrified retraction of any claims. The neighbors saw nothing, or perhaps they simply chose not to. In that neighborhood, silence was the loudest accomplice. One afternoon, the silence broke, the familiar sound of a raised voice, followed by the sickening thud from the kitchen. Lily didn't hesitate this time. She didn't hide. She remembered something her Uncle Jax, a mechanic who worked downtown, had casually mentioned months ago. "If you're ever in real trouble, kiddo, find the big guys on the big bikes. They might look scary, but they respect family." Jax didn't know the Vipers MC, but he knew the idea of a protective force outside the law. Lily snatched her faded backpack, shoved a teddy bear inside, and ran. Not to the police station, not to a neighbor, but instinctively toward the noise and the power she associated with protection, the downtown industrial area where the sound of roaring engines was constant. She ran until her small legs burned, until she stumbled onto a street where the air smelled of oil, exhaust, and an undeniable sense of danger. She found the clubhouse. It wasn't marked by a sign, just by a fortress-like brick building and a dozen imposing motorcycles lined up like silent, chrome sentinels. Above the heavy metal door, carved into the lintel, was the coiled snake logo of the Vipers MC. The compound was a hive of activity. Men, big, bearded, intimidating men, were working on engines, lifting weights, or just silently watching the street. At the center was Tank, the president of the Vipers. Tank wasn't just big, he was massive, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much and judged nothing. He wore his cut like a second skin, every patch a story, every line on his face a chapter of hardship. Lily walked right past the smaller members, past the intimidation, and stopped directly in front of Tank, who was polishing the engine of his prized Harley. He looked down at the tiny girl in pink sneakers, his massive hand pausing mid-wipe. The entire yard went silent. The only sound was the distant drone of city traffic. "Mister," Lily said, her voice a small, tight knot of desperation. She didn't cry. Crying was a weakness she couldn't afford. "Mister, my mum needs help. He hurts her where no one sees." Tank didn't say anything for a long moment. His eyes, usually hard and cold, softened ever so slightly. He crouched down, bringing his face closer to her level. The smell of leather and motor oil was overwhelming, but Lily only saw the kindness in his focused gaze. "Who hurts her, sweetheart?" he rumbled, his voice surprisingly gentle. "My dad," she whispered, her eyes finally welling up. "And he makes her promise not to tell. But I know. I see the sadness." Tank stood up slowly. He didn't need any more details. He saw the desperation, the raw plea for protection in a world that had failed her. He looked around the yard at his men. They hadn't moved. They had heard the whole exchange. The code was simple. They didn't involve themselves in the law's business, but they never stood by when an innocent was in danger, especially a child or a woman being abused. Their own pasts were often littered with the kind of darkness Lily was describing. Tank walked over to a table and picked up his keys. "We ride," he announced, his voice devoid of emotion, yet carrying the weight of an execution order. "Pound, you stay here. Reaper, you ride point. Knox, you come with me. We're going to teach a man about promises and keeping secrets." The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. The men, who minutes ago were laughing or working, moved with a single synchronized purpose. The rumble of engines starting up was deep, menacing, and final. Lily watched, wide-eyed, as these perceived villains strapped on their helmets and mounted their iron steeds. They weren't riding out for a party or a turf war. They were riding out for justice outside the confines of the system. They were riding out to fulfill the silent contract of protection that Lily, in her desperate run, had unknowingly activated. The heroes were coming, and they wore black. Tank looked back at Lily. "Where do we go, kid?" "The White House with the big oak tree," she said, pointing a trembling finger toward the direction she had run from. "Please hurry." The Bandidos MC, a terrifying convoy of shining chrome and deafening noise, pulled out onto the road, led by a mission dictated by a terrified 6-year-old girl. The suburb was about to receive a visit from its worst nightmare, which was, in fact, its only hope. The darkness in that pretty white house was about to be confronted by the darkness on the outside, a darkness forged in loyalty and a profound, if unconventional, sense of morality. The rumble of the Bandidos MC convoy was a sound that didn't just travel through the air. It vibrated in the chest, a deep, unsettling tremor of impending change. As they turned onto the quiet, tree-lined street of the white colonial house, the neighborhood's serenity shattered. Residents peered through their lace curtains, their faces pale with a mixture of fear and fascination. They had seen the news reports, read the warnings about clubs like the Vipers. This was chaos visiting their ordered, predictable lives. They didn't know this chaos was their salvation, albeit one they would never acknowledge. Tank led the charge, his focus singular. Lily, riding securely behind him, her small arms tightly wrapped around his massive torso, was their compass and their moral anchor. As they pulled up to the curb, the engines throttled down to a menacing idle, a collective growl that felt like a threat. The polished lawn suddenly seemed insignificant under the weight of their collective presence. The man inside, Thomas, Lily's father, a man who derived his power from silence and isolation, was about to face a very loud and very unified opposition. Knox, Tank's vice president, kicked down his stand with a metallic thud. He was the strategist, the cool head, though his knuckles were white as he gripped his handlebars. Like many of the men, Knox carried the heavy history of witnessing similar abuses, a history that made this mission personal. This wasn't about turf or drugs. It was about protecting the vulnerable, the oldest code of brotherhood. Tank dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel drive. He moved with a heavy, deliberate pace towards the front door. He didn't knock. He simply used his size to lean on the reinforced oak, and the door shuddered open. The house was quiet inside, too quiet. The confrontation earlier had been swift, brutal, and now the silence was Thomas's way of asserting control, of making Sarah wait for the next blow. Sarah was in the living room trying to stifle the shaking in her hands as she wiped a stain off the pristine white sofa, a mundane act of submission. She heard the thunder outside, the engines, the noise that didn't belong. When she saw Tank standing in her doorway, a terrifying silhouette filling the frame, she froze. Terror, not relief, was her first reaction. The reputation of the Bandidos MC preceded them in the darkest corners of the media. "Sarah," Tank's voice was low, resonating with a restrained power. "We're here for Lily. She's safe." Just then, Thomas appeared from the hallway, his face twisting from annoyed confusion to sheer, unadulterated rage. He saw the intimidating figures of the Bandidos MC, the notorious outlaws surrounding his home. He saw the bikes, the black leather, the patches. But what truly broke his composure was seeing his daughter, Lily, standing behind the monstrous figure of Tank, clutching the back of his vest. "What is the meaning of this? Get off my property, you criminals! I'll call the police." Thomas spat out the words, trying to conjure authority where he had none. Tank took 2 steps into the room, closing the distance. The size difference was immediate and humiliating for Thomas. "You won't call anyone," Tank stated, his eyes locking onto Thomas's, "because the law can't see the marks you leave. But we can." Thomas made a move, an instinctive reaction of a cornered coward, attempting to push past Tank to get to Sarah, to use her as a shield or a subject for his fury. It was a mistake. Before the move was even complete, Knox and Reaper, who had entered silently behind Tank, blocked the exits. The remaining Vipers members had formed a silent, impenetrable ring around the perimeter of the house, deterring any neighborly interference. The message was clear. This was a private matter, now enforced by a private army. Tank didn't lay a hand on him. Violence for the Vipers was a tool, not an impulse. He used his presence, his reputation, and the sheer weight of his moral authority in this situation. "You hurt them where no one sees," Tank said, the accusation a heavy hammer blow. "Lily sees, and now we see. Your reign of silence ends now." The conversation that followed was short, decisive, and terrifying for Thomas. Tank laid out the terms, not of a beating, but of an absolute final eviction. The Vipers had connections. They knew lawyers who worked pro bono for victims of abuse, and they knew how to leverage Thomas's fear of exposure. They offered him a choice: leave the house, file for an immediate, quiet separation, and never come near Sarah or Lily again, or face the full, uncompromising wrath of the MC, a wrath that would make the police look like a pleasant inconvenience. They didn't threaten his life, but they threatened his whole existence, his reputation, and his ability to hide. Thomas, trembling and finally seeing the abyss of his self-made isolation, chose the path of least resistance. With silent terror, he packed a small bag. The Vipers watched him go, a single file of judgment as he drove away in his pristine sedan, now utterly alone. The silence that returned to the house was different. It wasn't the silence of fear, but of peace. Tank turned to Sarah, who was leaning against the wall, tears finally streaming down her face. "You and Lily are safe now," he said gently. "We'll have a few brothers keeping watch for the next month. The paperwork is already filed. You won't see him again." Lily ran to her mother, who enveloped her in a protective hug. Tank simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a job done. The Vipers MC didn't seek gratitude or recognition. They operated outside the system, for their own code. They were the shadows that fought the shadows. As the Vipers mounted their bikes and roared back down the quiet street, leaving behind a bewildered neighborhood and a newly freed family, the perception of them remained the same: outlaws, villains. But to Sarah and Lily, they were the armored, thundering answer to a whispered prayer. They were the heroes who hurt no one but the guilty, and who proved that sometimes the true protectors wear the darkest colors. The thunder faded, and the sun continued to shine, but the truth was out. The Vipers MC, the supposed bandits, had just saved a family, proving that every coin has 2 sides, and sometimes the men you run from are the only ones you can run to.